I am a member of a newly created paranormal investigation team based here in my hometown. It all started when our group of about 10 or so friends decided to go over to Waverly Sanatorium in Kentucky. That's what got us started in the first place. Over the next few weeks, some of our group members kind of fizzled out and didn't hang around as much, but there are about 5 or 6 of us still going strong, including myself. My first solo experience with a spirit happened at one of our group's founders' house. There were 3 founders, me and 2 of my friends, and this is our normal hangout spot on the weekends. A little history about the house as we were in at the time. My friend's step-brother and his mom used to live in that house. His mom is now passed on, rest her soul. She was into the Wicca and witchcraft realm. She would hold seances in graveyards, do different rituals in the house. They lived in with no regard for what would happen. Me and my friends, 2 girls and 4 or 5 guys, were hanging out over at the house. Nothing really happens in the house while a big group is there, but the girls were ready to go home. So my friend, who owned the house, was going to take them home. We had the idea for me to stay back on my own. First mistake, and do an EVP session in the house. Which, of course, being the tough guy I am, I said sure. They leave. I say goodbye to the girls and see them off. This is where it gets trippy. I go back into the house to do the EVP session. The recorder is lying on the table by the door, and the kitchen is on the far side of the room as you walk in. It's a rather long living room that leads to the 3 bedrooms and the bathroom. That's pretty much the house, other than the attic, which is a big no-no to go up there alone. So, I walked to the kitchen and grabbed me a drink. When I came back in the house, it felt a lot heavier. It just felt different from when everybody else was here earlier. As I am coming back from the kitchen to grab the recorder, I felt like I had to stop in the middle of the living room. So I did. I stared down the hall and I knew something was there. Could just feel it. Then I hear 4 footsteps walk right up to me and stop. At this point, I was pretty freaked out. Then it was like someone stomped their right foot in front of me, where this thing should be standing. That was enough for me. I hightailed it across the street to this other house and sat on the porch until they got back. I waited for maybe 20 minutes. When they returned, they thought I was still in the house. When they saw me come off the porch and I told them what happened, my friend said I looked physically shaken and I had no color in my face. This is a half hour after it happened. I swore to my buddy that I would never be alone in the house again. I don't do so much as sit in the driveway and wait for him to get home. I sit at the Crystals down the road. To this day, he thinks that it was his stepmother's mom. But I think it was someone else. It sounded like a man to me. But we can sit across the road and watch the lights turn on in the house at night. And us as a group to turn them off because after what happened that night, it freaked us all out. Our other co-founder of the group swears he kept seeing a little girl all around the living room, mostly standing behind him and myself. I think that the reason there are spirits there and wanted me out was that they didn't know who I was, and I think that the stepbrother's mom is still attached to the 3-foot-tall China doll that is still kept in the house. With that and an old newspaper is all that I found left of hers. Everything else was thrown out, which I'm sure helped nothing. This is one of my first and only really creepy experiences while ghost hunting. I took part in my first ghost hunt for Halloween last year. I will try to recite my experience as best I can, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. The location was at a hotel and bar that has a reputation for being active. The building still trades at a hotel, so I will leave it unnamed. Suffice to say, we have permission from the owners before going ahead. I am a confirmed believer, but have never sought to seek out the paranormal in any way, so approach the event apprehensively but open-minded. The event was a real eye-opener, and the story I would like to tell occurred during one of the vigils we held during the night. I will start with a quick layout of the area. Beneath the hotel runs a series of tunnels and rooms which make up the cellar. At the far end of the cellar is a narrow tunnel which is used as the barrel run for the bar. We were told that ordinarily this room would be stocked with beer barrels, but on this night it was empty. It was in here where we decided to hold our vigil. The first thing we noticed on entering the barrel run was the cold temperature compared to the rest of the cellar. This could be put down to the time of year and the fact that the run has a metal door that could be opened to drop barrels down, which could allow cold air in. The area also had a very strange atmosphere, which it hadn't had when I visited earlier in the night. Turning our torches off, we weren't in total darkness due to moonlight shining through the barrel drop doors with an emergency exit light. We created this energy circle and called out for any presence to make itself known. We were awarded a soft tapping at the end of the corridor, away from the barrel drop. We rolled out pipes as no visible pipes ran through this part of the cellar, and the main pipe run was on the completely opposite end of the cellar. We had explored that area earlier in the night, and it is behind a heavy wooden door which blocks out most of the noise. We had an interesting experience there, which saw a member of the group run out at high speed. Anyway, back to the tapping. We called it again for the tapping to be repeated, and it was, still faint and in the same location. One of the group pointed out a strange shadow that had appeared in the open doorway, which joined the barrel run to the rest of the cellar. This was at the same end of the tunnel the tapping had been coming from. We all turned and every member of the group agreed that they could see a shadowy figure at the end of the corridor. From where I stood, the shape of the body, shoulders, and head could be seen clearly. We were the only group in the basement at this time, but shouted out to see if it was someone who had lost their group. We got no reply, but the shadow appeared to move in our direction. We called it again, encouraging the figure to approach us. It didn't, but it did stay in the same position before disappearing. It didn't fade or walk away. It was a case of being there 1 minute and then gone the next. We moved out of the main barrel run into a side room of the barrel run that was used for storage of an old bar furniture. The doorway we used was the only entrance. Away from the two sources of light we had before, this room was pitch black with the torches off. The moment we walked into the room, the atmosphere became very heavy, and to me, it felt hostile. Other members of the group later confirmed that they felt unwelcomed in the storage room. We created a circle around the old table and called out for anyone present to make themselves known. One of the groups facing towards the back of the room said they could see red lights flashing. Great, that's the way my back was facing. Calling out again, we asked if the feeling we had was there was a male spirit with us, could do anything else. The sudden loud noise of wood scraping across stone caused a few screams and numerous torches to be switched on. The table we had circled had visibly turned slightly. All members of the group denied accidentally touching the table, so we turned our lights off and asked if he could do it again. The feeling we got was the entity was a male, and the same person who we had seen as the shadow earlier. The feeling we got was the entity was a male, and the same person who we had seen as a shadow earlier. We waited, and apart from red lights flashing at the back of the room, only seen by the same person as earlier, nothing happened. So we asked, if you want us to go, do something to show us or we will not leave. This was quickly followed by the unquestionable sound of coin bouncing and settling on the floor behind me. We quickly turned our torches and went to go investigate. The only thing I found that could have explained the noise was a 10-pence coin. This could have been there before we had entered, but it was very distinct noise. Taking that as our cue, we left the room and ended our vigil.
I and my friends are really into scary stuff like horror movies and ghost stories. And of course, we love to visit reportedly haunted places, just to challenge ourselves for fun. So, there are these vast pine forest areas up on a hill situated about a 3-hour drive from where I live. Rumor has it that the forest is haunted. Many years ago, some poor people decided to end their lives there by jumping off the deadly steep cliff known as the Bow, as it resembles a ship's bow. People who live nearby have often reported sightings of ghostly body parts scattered around the forest floor, and frightening sounds of screaming and human-like tortured cries for help. We'd heard and known about the pine forest since we were little kids, but somehow we had never had the guts to visit it. Until one day, we got pretty bored of visiting the other haunted places in our town. We had never seen any ghosts, and the pine forest came across our minds when we decided to give it a shot. At first, we seemed a bit reluctant, but then we all agreed that we needed something a little bit scarier to do as we're all in our early 20s. It was a foggy and wet night when we drove our way up to the forest. From the moment that I got in the car, I felt like something's not right. I could just tell that it wasn't. But I didn't want my friends to think that I was afraid, so I showed off a little bit, talking about scary possibilities that might happen there in the pine forest. When we finally arrived, the road had divided the forest. It was so dark and cold. We parked in front of an abandoned building and then made our way into the pine trees. Everybody walked so fast and nobody even said a word. The forest was so dark and frightening. We kept walking for minutes until we finally saw the bough. We sat down and gathered and started talking and telling ghost stories and scary legends related with the pine forest. We started talking about those who have died here. When my friend Bobby was telling his story, suddenly, I saw a quick movement in the corner of my eye. I turned around and whatever it was already gone. Now at first, I thought it could be some animals wandering around in the forest, but then we heard scratching voices coming from the top of the bough, as if there was something up there dragging its body up to it. I looked up, and I could make out a vague dark silhouette of a man standing there, looking down at us. I started shaking all over, and my friends were now all looking at me. Bobby has seen it too. He grabbed my shoulder tight and whispered, "Who's that?" I was just too afraid to break the silence. "Let's get out of here," said Bobby in a low tone. But we were so scared, we got petrified. Bobby was the first to get on his knees. "We better get back out of here now," he whispered, and then started walking. We all followed him silently. As soon as the bough was out of sight, we started running as fast as we could. For a moment there, I thought the dark figure was coming after us. I was really afraid. I kept praying to God while running. When we finally saw our car, my friend Dickie told us that he had left the key in the forest. We all started cursing him, but then we decided to break into the abandoned house and stayed inside until morning, though it was really dark in there. That night, none of us could sleep. We spent the night feeling frightened in a tiny room in the house. It was a squeeze, but we didn't care. At around 2 a.m., we heard light footsteps somewhere in the left wing of the house. We squeezed closer and tighter, holding our breath. As the sound of the footsteps became louder and louder, I closed my eyes tight and plugged both my ears with my index fingers, and then I felt the presence in the room with us. But I kept my eyes and ears shut. I was too afraid. I got the tingling sensation as if somebody standing pretty close to me. It lasted for about 30 minutes. I could feel my friend squeezing my body from all sides. When I finally got tired, I got my hands off my ears and embraced myself. But I kept my eyes shut still. We sat on the floor there in the dark, tiny room for about 4 hours, but it felt as if we had been there for ages. At around 6 a.m., we finally got out of the house. The sky had looked a little brighter. When the sun finally rose, we went back to the forest to get to the key, and then we drove back to town as soon as we could. Nobody talked. We still couldn't believe our luck. We finally made it back home safe and sound. Even until today, I still get the goosebumps whenever I think about that terrifying night in the pine forest. I sure as hell would never go back there, even if it was the last safe place on Earth, and I'll definitely won't be trying to hunt any ghost anymore. I have been part of a paranormal research team for several years. Each weekend, we go to a new location in our town that is said to be haunted. I will try to be very specific about what happened during this investigation the best I can, but if you have any questions, feel free to comment them below. This story starts with our most recent investigation. We were at a very old, very haunted cemetery in our town called Jordan Cemetery. When we first got there, it was still light outside. We weren't very creeped out. We even felt comfortable enough to split up for a little while. And then, things started happening. I was walking around the back right corner of the cemetery when I felt someone come up behind me and wrap their arms around me. I thought that it was my boyfriend, who was also a member of our team, so I smiled and turned around. But when I turned, no one was there. We had split up and my boyfriend was all the way across the cemetery, along with the other two members of our team who were at different ends. I started getting really scared and went back to our meeting point. When we got back together, it was getting very dark. We went over to sit on a bench near one of the graves, when suddenly, my boyfriend and I saw a shadow duck behind a tree. We got up to investigate, and just as we got 10 yards away from the bench we were sitting at, I turned around and saw a small, black shadow figure running towards us. I started freaking out and pointed it to my team. All of us saw it at the same time and started backing away, but we managed to keep our cameras on it and catch it on film just as it started to fade away. Once it faded, we stayed for a little while to see if it would return, but it never did, so we turned and walked away. About halfway across the cemetery, we got a very off feeling and stopped in our tracks. We stayed in the same spot, dead silent, until a woman's voice broke the silence. It said, "Right now, there is a," and the rest was unintelligible. My team and I went nuts. The voice was loud enough to be caught on our cameras. Just as we calmed down, we heard a very loud music right next to us. We started turning around and looking for the source, and then I realized that I recognized a song. It was Somebody to Love by Queen, and it was coming from my iPod, which was in my bag and had been shut down completely. How it could have been turned on and started playing music by itself is unexplainable. We started cheering and thanking the spirit for letting his presence be known. And just as we stopped, we looked up to see a large black figure of a woman standing across the graveyard from us, only to disappear, and we got a very weird, uneasy feeling and left to go to our next location, which was another cemetery. There is still a running funeral home next to it, so I'm going to leave out the name. We didn't stay here for very long, and not much happened except for this one incident. I was walking with my team and a random song popped into my head. I had never heard the song before, but I just couldn't get out of my head. I thought things were going fine, but the next thing I knew, I was halfway across the cemetery from where I'd originally been. My whole body was tingling and my team was yelling to me to snap out of it. I asked what had happened, and they told me that I totally zoned out and had started singing an eerie sounding song, and was staring off into the distance and wandering away from that. My boyfriend also mentioned that my eyes were very dilated. At first, I thought they were pranking me and I didn't believe them. I didn't want to believe them, but they swore on their lives that they were telling the truth, and I'd gotten a glimpse of me on camera when I had just started singing the song.
For the longest of my life, I didn't know that I had any Native American in me. I do. I'm in a very backwards part of Arkansas. I own and work with my dad on a 1,000-acre farm. The farm next to mine has these big Indian burial grounds. The burial grounds are only on one part of the farm, so this happens to be the one part of the farm that my father and I have to rent from the owners of that farm. I've never worked in the field before until this year, and I have a feeling it's going to be my loss in that field. I was cutting hay about 2 weeks ago, and my tractor was acting up. This is a brand new tractor we just bought, and around 7:30, it started acting like it wanted to stop, which is not normal at all. I got off the tractor and turned it off, and that was my first mistake. When I got off the tractor, I heard the cows from my farm begin to stampede and call out as if something was trying to kill them. Naturally, I wanted to go see what was wrong, but my tractor wouldn't start. And I will say again, brand new tractor. Now, most people would probably just go back home and and get help or a tow truck. That's not my case scenario, because where my farm is literally on the last stop of a 17-mile drive. So nobody's coming for me, and for some reason, my phone isn't working. It's just gone dead. I looked to the field to my left and looked to the field to my right, which is normally filled with cow. But nothing this time. I began to feel a cold chill around me, which I suppose was normal because it started to rain. Then I caught a smell in the air, which I suppose is normal due to the cow path. And the field I was working in was relatively close to the dumping site, so I just thought it was the wind. At that point, I began to walk back to the road. That was my second mistake. I could hear something in the woods, but I thought it was the normal deer or wild hogs. But then I heard my dad yelling my name, which I suppose wasn't much of a surprise, as I've had the tractor off for quite a while. I guess he wanted to see what was going on. I thought it was my lucky break. So I began to call and go towards him, telling him that the tractor wouldn't start and I'm freezing cold and can he come out to get me? I got no reply. I then stopped, and I went back to sit up on the tractor and stayed up to see where he was. Then, I saw it. My dad's truck, a dime's worth of a mile away, heading over the levee to the other side of our farm. There was no way he could just have been calling me, and he wouldn't leave me out in the cold. My mind began to race. I watched way too many skinwalker stories. Then, I heard it. It sounded like a pig snorting, and then it ended with a mixture of a mountain lion roar and a hoarse neigh. I bolted for the neighboring farmhouse, even though they weren't home. The rain was pouring down on me. My straw hat just basically turns flopsy. I'm an 18-year-old looking like a sniveling 9-year-old child. The neighbors' doors were locked, so I had nowhere to hide but under the house. Not even looking for snakes, I bolted for the one entry point. My glasses were starting to fog up, so I couldn't see very well at all. All I saw was something going across the Indian battlegrounds, towards my tractor, and then on top of it. Then, a loud, violent roar. And still scared. And still cold. But thankfully, I don't live on the farm anymore. But unfortunately, the house I'm living in the sea was also built on an Indian burial ground. So it's only a matter of time before he comes here too. I think the cause was me cutting hay on the Indian burial ground. It'd been excavated a long time ago, but I guess whatever it was didn't want me up there. And I won't go back again. At the very least, not there.